What with everything that's happening in the world economy, events here at Stormont seem strangely irrelevant. But there are similarities, believe me. It's all private members' business on the agenda today. With no executive meeting, the trickle of legislation that was beginning to flow has run dry. And with no legislation to keep them busy, there are signs that they're beginning to run out of things to talk about. Last week, the Assembly debated the same subject for the third time in under a year. So, like the financial system, and here's perhaps the only similarity, Stormont appears to be grinding to a halt. With me, the Robert Peston of political reporting, Mark Devenport. Mark, you don't need to do the accent.
Apparently David Cameron does a mean impression of Robert Peston, but I'm not even going to attempt it.
OK, probably safe that you don't. But he is the man at the moment. But in terms of politics, tell us what's happening at the moment, because when you look at what we see in the order paper, it's private members' stuff, no legislation, it is effectively a talking shop.
Well, if we have to grasp for some kind of metaphor that's common, I suppose, to the banking collapse and what's going on here at Stormont, I suppose you'd go for that word confidence. Lack of confidence in the banking structure has meant that people are reaching for their deposits and taking out their money, and banks are worried about collapsing. Here, no confidence as usual between the two main parties. That's leading to this standoff in the executive, gridlock, no business being done at the executive, and therefore no business coming through, no overnight loans being made from the executive to the Assembly, so nothing really for them to chew on in terms of work. So we've had, very worthy topics discussed so far today, a debate about cuts in ambulance cover, a debate that I think is drawing to a close at the moment about the needs of special needs school leavers, and later on we'll have a debate about regional inequality, but none of that sort of meaty legislation which devolution is meant to provide for the executive to bring forward to the Assembly. However, some rustling in the undergrowth.
Yes, and this rustling is on one of the committees.
Yeah, not in the chamber that we'll see during the course of the programme today, but in room 144 at Stormont there's been a meeting of the Assembly Executive and Review Committee, and that's the committee which, amongst various other tasks, is meant to be looking at the whole thorny question of the devolution of policing and justice. Now, interestingly enough, they're still going about their business. Why is that interesting? Well, when we had the failure to hold an executive meeting a couple of weeks back, Peter Robinson said one of the serious consequences would be that this committee's work would be frozen. It hasn't been frozen. It is still going on. So that's the first thing to come out of it, the fact that they are still looking at it. Another thing that happened, which was interesting this morning, was that the DUP's Simon Hamilton raised the whole business about the fact that the Alliance Party is not in this committee. There's 11 people on the committee. They're representatives of the four main parties, but there's no member from the Alliance Party. And they're now looking at if they can, say, co-opt a 12th man or a 12th woman onto that committee from the Alliance, or whether one of them would have to stand down and give a job over to the Alliance. Why is that interesting? Well, because all the speculation has been that the DUP and Sinn Féin would like to give this job to the Alliance as the sort of best compromise candidate. So you could see this business of bringing an Alliance person onto the committee that's looking at the scope for devolution as a precursor to that.
Yeah, so you mentioned this as an example of where those serious consequences haven't been followed through on. We had a North-South Ministerial Council meeting which didn't take place last week. Sinn Féin seemed to say this was very serious, but again, no sign of consequences. Is this place just continuing in some form of stalemate?
Yeah, and I mean the stalemate seems to be within certain parameters. That committee is continuing with its work, but you can detect, as I listen to the proceedings, you can detect a bit of a tug of war still between, on the one hand, the DUP, who are looking for reasons why the whole devolution of justice process should be played out in the longer term. They're talking particularly now a lot about the financing of policing and having to get that right, and how that will need a lot of study, whereas you've got Sinn Féin in the shape of Alec Maskey was saying, we've got to get on with it. We don't want to get bogged down in unending inquiries here. So you can see that sort of tug of war happening. But it's true, though, that work's still continuing. Yeah, the North-South Ministerial Council didn't take place, but a British-Irish Council, which unionists think is important, did take place. So you can sort of see at the moment that it's not full-blown warfare.
OK, Mark, stay with us, of course.